is Friday, February 23rd, and this is Season 2, Episode 8 of Mind Body Evolution. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Eric. So, I've been thinking a lot about AI recently. And
You and everyone else, yes.
Me and everyone else. And I've been to a couple of professional development events at my university. I have spent some time looking at the products out there. I've been thinking about it to the point where we came up with the title of today's podcast, Using AI, because it was better than our titles. It worked better.
Well, we were working with some clunky
exactly, and so it came out with a smoother, more professional sounding title than we would have come out with on our own.
Yes, it
and
did.
That is what AI does.
Yes, it does.
And it rubs the all the bumps off of things and makes everything look nice and shiny, but also slightly soulless. And I think the title reflects that as well. It sounds exactly like a very typical internet kind of title on an article or a podcast.
And teaching in the age of AI. Yes,
yeah.
It's very
very slick and slightly soulless. Yeah. And that's really the essence of AI, and that is, I think, its true dangers and its true advantages, and why we're all going to be using it. And
that and the fact that it lies to you and presents it as truth.
All of these issues slickly and professionally.
Yes.
Yeah. And can be directed to do that, or will just do it on its own. Hard to say. Can't tell. Yeah. So it's really interesting being a professor as AI has been implemented, and seeing sort of the iterations have happened. And I want to start off by just talking about the writing. And this is what everyone was first.
You mean the writing that you are receiving from your students and how it has been affected by AIs being integrated,
or technology in general up till now, with AI being sort of the icing on the cake. What's changed recently?
That's an interesting way of thinking of it, because I don't see AI as icing. I see AI as a whole new technology that's changing everything the way the printing press did.
It is, but thinking about from the point of view of a student, a typewriter was a tremendous new advantage.
Yes.
A computer changed everything once it could spell for you. I would not have gotten a PhD if I didn't have a computer that could spell for me.
I had a professor in college who told me to write a paper on a computer, and I fought it, and then it never went back. It changed my life.
It changes everything. And it changes it because suddenly you don't have to worry about things like the spelling. It just does it for you. And it frees you.
It also frees you in other ways, because handwriting is actually laborious. You can type much faster, and suddenly thoughts become transformed
absolutely
into
all
permanent
true
words, and so quickly.
These were things that enabled me personally to succeed, because I would not have been able to, as a dyslexic person. I am really dyslexic, really very, very dyslexic. I would not have been able to do anything. No one would have read my handwritten papers, and the spelling would have made people think I was in fourth grade. So it was something that made it possible, like a wheelchair might make it possible for someone who can't walk to move around. It was really a new and incredibly useful tool. And I suspect that there are many people in my generation who were coming forward, in the 80s and 90s in the same kind of world, where suddenly you realize there's things you could do that you thought you could never do. And in science, to even larger extent, when I would go into the storage rooms in various science facilities, I like to look at the old stuff because I'm a curious person. I like to see cool things. And I would see these things that were called standard curves. And they were pieces of plastic that had standardized curves for a graph you would be drawing. So that if you wanted a bell curve, you could have a narrow one or a wide one, and you would draw it. You would hand draw it and submit that for publication. I would have never been able to publish anything, never a dissertation, nothing, because I cannot hand draw a graph. It doesn't matter if you give me a piece of plastic to trace. There's going to be blobs on it. There's going to be notches on it. It won't line up properly. There is absolutely no way I would ever have been able to produce a graph. I started with professors who'd actually trained in the old world. So when I first, because at first I'd gotten a master's in philosophy, and then I switched to a PhD program, and I had to get some undergraduate classes on the way. And so I was working with some of these older generations of professors who had done an awful lot of hand work for their papers. And one of the first things I had to do was take a printout of the United States and draw range maps for amphibians showing their where they are, where they used to be, that kind of thing.
You had to freehand draw this?
I had to freehand draw a range map.
So in order to be a scientist, you had to also be an artist.
Absolutely, basically in every aspect. So if you needed an illustration, you had to be able to draw it. Pictures had actually, been invented by the time the 1980s rolled around, so things were being photographed and such. But for a range map of organisms, those would be, you'd have a printed out map, and then you would draw on it where something was.
Right, that range map didn't exist before you got the data and needed to create it.
And needed to create it, exactly.
Then it needed to be created.
And so you would go back and forth between, you would research sightings, and you would put dots on the map, and then you would draw a circle around those dots to show where something was. And I got a D on this project. And there was no way I was going to get anything but a D on this project, because my hand was shaky as I did it. Things didn't line up properly. I would have needed 6 copies of this map to be able to do it. It was a nightmare, and it was never going to improve. But this would be tremendously easy on a computer today. Map of the United States, draw some circles in whatever program you're using, blop them on the map, and it would take you no time at all.
You were able to do things you wouldn't have been able to do as in a handicapped person being prevented.
Absolutely.
In a society not built for them.
Absolutely. And
so what are you seeing now?
Well, we're working up to that, and
Okay.
this is actually something I think about a lot. Is that if you build a world that helps the people who are having the most difficulty, you actually help everyone else as well. And so something that made it possible for me to exist, everyone else enjoyed being able to spell correctly as well.
And not have to hand draw.
And not have to
maps,
hand draw everything. So this I think is something where accessibility is something that we need to think about for everyone, and should not be for particular individuals. That the better we make life for people who have difficulties, the easier it will be for all of us. It's impossible for someone in a wheelchair to get upstairs, so an elevator helps. An elevator will help everyone.
I mean, this is the argument for universal health care and the universal basic income and all of these things.
We're getting distracted, but these are also things that I directly connect with the rise of technology and the way it's been interacting with education. And so I definitely am getting students who I wouldn't have seen before. Some of them have learning disabilities, and they're using the computers to help them. Others have their English as a second language, or they're first generation. None of their family have ever been to university, and so they don't speak the same standard English that a university would expect of them. And so this has been a bit of an issue. For a while, Word, after it was figuring out spelling, started to work a little bit on grammar. And this was helping students a little bit, but most of them were ignoring the grammar prompts. I was generally ignoring the grammar prompts because they seemed idiosyncratic. They weren't incredibly useful most of the time. And so I was getting papers that the spelling had largely been fixed. Sometimes I think students don't even notice when they get the red underline on the word. Clearly there's typos. They've just put 2 words together into one big word, and they didn't notice, and Word did, but they didn't notice Word noticing. So that's a separate issue. That has nothing to do with computers or AI. But this was something that had been helping students, but there was a limit to it. Their English just couldn't get better with the existing technology. And I was often sending people to the Writing Center for things like simple things like subject-verb agreement. They would say, the people's is, and instead of the people are.
What is the Writing Center?
The Writing Center at the university, where you would just send people to be tutored, and they would go through their paper and see what comments I had made, and then understand what I meant, because a lot of students wouldn't know what a subject-verb agreement meant. And
so
that
somewhere they can get help to interpret your comments.
interpret my comment, because I'm interpreting the way a professor would
Yeah,
interpret something,
yeah.
saying, you know, your plurals don't match your verbs, and they need to. And I can't read your papers.
So has the Writing Center become the AI?
Well, the Writing Center was definitely helping people. And then when AI came out, I was terrified. I had a lot of students who their English was not great, and they had not come through a system writing in English. And some of them couldn't really write at all, even though they were in graduate classes with me. And they'd all gotten A's before because no one had ever really made them write much. And
That's rough.
so I had decided that for my own sort of ability to see myself as a good teacher, I needed to make grad students write papers. And this made them suffer. And some of them...
Well, sounds like it would also make you suffer, because you now have to teach them what you're teaching in addition to teaching them how to write.
And so I couldn't teach them English, so I was sending them to the Writing Center so they could learn. And I said, look, you need to go every week and you need to work on this. And when they did this, I saw tremendous advancement. I saw them actually writing better papers.
Somehow I'm not surprised by that.
But some of them were trying to get around the system, not have to go to the Writing Center, and not have to do the writing. And so what they would do is they would cut and paste sections of a text. So if they had to write the methods section of a paper, it's just a list of techniques that were done in the actual paper. And my students generally had to paraphrase it. But students who had a hard time with English were having a hard time paraphrasing. First, it was difficult to read. The material was very technical. And then it was difficult to put it into your own words without just copying the technical information. And this was a struggle. So they would put it through something called a thesaurus or a text spinner. A thesaurus program.
A text spinner.
A text spinner. And what it does is it was a way of getting around Safe Assign. So Safe Assign is something that professors have that's a record basically of all papers that have been sent to professors ever by professors. And so if a student just copies a previous paper, it will say you are copying it. And it tells you what percentage is copied.
Where does this Safe Assign database get all the papers from? Do all the professors submit them?
Whenever I have students submit work, I click the little thing that says check with Safe Assign. And so when Safe Assign is checking the paper, they're also recording the paper, essentially.
So this is data that's collated from all the professors that are using it.
Yes, and also I think it knows all the papers that have been, put out in general.
Well, forgive me. I know that most of the people listening to us are actually in this environment. I am not. I have not been in the university environment for a long time.
Stepping back for a moment, this is for professors and students in many ways, and they all should know what I'm talking about.
But what I'm asking is, this is a ubiquitous thing now, and I just don't know about it because I haven't been there.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So what?
Sorry, everyone, for this.
So what students had been doing is. Supposedly frats were doing this a lot. I'm not sure if it was all frats or not. I don't want to malign frats in general, but any group of students with an institutional ability to save papers for next year,
right?
People's younger brothers, this sort of thing, would just give me the paper again the next year. And it's very difficult to tell, especially when you have 10 papers on the same subject. Getting one from the previous year would just be slipped in really easily.
Forgive, maybe it's just the Sarah Lawrence in me, but what's the point of not doing the work?
Exactly. Well, most of the students really do the work, but there's always some who are seeking a way to get by.
And you do so much work to not do the work. Anyway,
I know, exactly.
All right.
And so I basically solved the problem with Safe Assign, and I was sending back papers to people. This is showing up as 70% copied. You need to put this into your own words some. And then what they would do is they would put it through a text spinner. And a text spinner changes the orders and the words used so that you have the same meaning but a different word, and it beats Safe Assign. But what it actually produces is gibberish, particularly for scientific papers, because it takes something like an immune system where you can't change those words. An immune system is an immune system. And they would change it to protective framework. And so I would be reading these things. I could not understand what the students were doing. And I would ask them, and they'd say, yes, I absolutely am writing this myself. I'm just using a little help from this text spinner to get the language right. And I knew what they were actually doing was cutting and pasting chunks, then rewriting it. And if they rewrote it from the text spinner, it actually came out okay sometimes, but I could always tell because of the strange words that were coming out. Very strange juxtapositions of language that didn't make any sense, didn't sound like a scientific technical paper, but they were just sort of getting by on this.
So you could tell on your own.
Yeah, and I got to the point where I was no longer going to accept this. I would say this in my syllabus. If I see any evidence of a text spinner, I'm not going to try and fix your gibberish. I'm just going to say, try again. And I would have students drop out because if they had to try again, they couldn't really write English, and so they had to leave. I had students who tried again and got it and actually became good writers. It's amazing. When you're in your early 20s, simply just having someone force you to write 10 papers over the course of the semester, the difference between the beginning and the end of the semester is amazing. I watch these students learn to write because no one's ever done this.
When you make an effort, it pays off.
It really pays off. Yeah, I mean, most of the time when a student turns in a paper, they just get a grade on it. And so what I was doing was I was doing a system where they would turn in a paper, I would write comments, and then we would revise the paper for a new grade. And this really, really helped them learn how to do things, but it meant that they really had to do it. And that was a bar that some of them couldn't get over.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a reasonable bar.
Yeah, absolutely. And now things have changed again. So we left behind the story spinner world when we entered the world of AI. And I was afraid of what all the other professors were afraid of. I was afraid that the students were simply going to have AI write their papers, turn it into me, and I'd see that it was too perfect, and I knew it was too good to be a student's writing, but there would be nothing I could do about it. And I would just have to give everyone an A and no one would be doing any work anymore.
But that's not what happened.
It's not what happened. I had a pure writing class. It's all online. There's no reason that they couldn't do this, but because I got ahead of it, I realized what might happen. I wrote a long description in my syllabus of what I would like them to do. I said, you can turn in AI papers as long as you also give me the prompts. And I realized that looking at a scientific paper, you can't easily take a scientific paper and just cut and paste it into ChatGPT and then have it turn it out in the right way.
Not a scientific paper.
No.
Other kinds of papers,
possibly,
maybe you can.
But you're taking a journal article and then asking for a summary of it in a particular format. It was difficult for ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to force ChatGPT to do it if I broke it down into small segments.
Mm-hmm.
And I could make each segment give me a good piece of text that made sense, free of hallucination if I kept it short. But I had to have a prompt to do that. And I told them, if you give me the prompts, I will approve any AI text you give me. But unlike if you write it yourself, there's a limit. You can't give me a 100-page AI paper and expect me to read it. I will read 2 pages of AI writing, 2 single-space pages of AI writing. If you, as a person, give me 4 pages of single-space writing, I will read that. I will not read 4 single-space pages of AI writing. You have to keep it in the limits, because with AI, you can tell it what those limits are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured if I was teaching AI engineering, I wanted to see prompts. They had to keep it to a very specific format, and I wanted to see them do that. And so I thought that would be really a useful way for students to learn how to use AI as a sort of writing tool.
Did they do this?
I'm now on my 3rd year of this, 2.5. And no student has taken me up on this. 0 of them have actually used AI to write a paper when I have told them I will accept it and you just have to tell me how you did it. Because it's actually harder than what...
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're really integrating their work into what the AI is doing that way, and you're making them prove it.
I was
trying
to.
Like this.
It just never happened.
They've never
done it.
So are they just submitting AI papers without telling you, or are they doing the work themselves?
No, as far as I can tell, no. Whenever I see things improve too much, or if there's a strange soulless feeling to a paper,
Mm-hmm.
I do run it through the AI detectors.
What are the AI detectors?
They're programs that look for what's called bursting. Bursting is when the author of a paper chooses an unusual word, or an unusual turn of phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And AIs don't do this. AIs are very, very straight ahead. That's why they're soulless. They always write the same thing in sort of, not the same way. They can actually write it in 100 different ways, but they'll write it in that same soulless way every time. And it's always going to be a very standard English. I'm not going to see any evidence that someone came from another country or someone's family came from another country. I'm not going to see unusual grammar formations. I'm not,
or even interesting or unique. Or
exactly.
Funny, or
yeah.
Anything.
AI will never throw in a comment right in the middle. I'll often tell them you really shouldn't in a scientific paper, but it lets me know I'm really reading a student.
When you run it through a detector, how does it return that response? Is it just like, yes, this was written by AI, and no, it wasn't? I mean, is it that clear?
No, it's actually really funny. It gives me a percentage of how human the work is.
Huh.
And so a lot of my students come out as about 60% human. And so I'm wondering, what are they doing that these papers have suddenly gotten better, but they're not using these AI prompts that I said they could? Doesn't seem like they're using AI overall. I'm seeing what is clearly their own language sometimes. I'm seeing what is clearly their own ideas.
And yet they have improved without being
I've
pure
seen a
AI.
sudden improvement, and grammar is no longer an issue with most students. And they're coming on when I see the sudden improvement with perfect grammar from someone I wasn't expecting it from, they come out as 60% human. So why are they not 100% human?
Do you have an answer to this?
I do. I figured out what they're doing because I asked them.
And they told you?
Well, because I said, look, I'm not going to give you a hard time. I just need to know what's going on. And every time they would do these weird things, I would ask them. Some of them, they lied about the text spinners. I had to figure that out. They're like, no, that's my own paper. I'm like, no, it's not.
It's not.
No human writes that way. But they didn't lie about this because, one, I had a really good relationship with some of these students. So they would tell me what they were doing. And I said, just tell me.
So what are they doing?
It's Grammarly. So
Grammarly.
Grammarly is a program that figures out if your grammar is in the right format. And students had been using it, but it wasn't helping them much. But starting about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Grammarly hooked up with OpenAI. And so Grammarly is now rewriting their papers for them. And it's not a prompt, so it's not what I'm asking for in my syllabi, but they're taking each section of their papers that they write. So they're writing a paper, and they're running it through Grammarly, and it's fixing everything.
So the Grammarly now is both fixing the grammar and doing an AI push through it as well.
Just to make sure everything comes out nice and smoothly. But it doesn't know anything that the student hasn't given it. So it's still all the student's work, sort of. And I'm not completely comfortable with this, but I'm growing comfortable because what I'm seeing is students who would have a really hard time with a pure writing class doing much, much better because of this. They are able to turn in papers with perfect subject-verb agreement. If I say you need to make a topic sentence on this particular topic, they can say, Grammarly, I need a topic sentence that says this. Grammarly will fix it. I'm getting a lot of really good papers without the same errors as before. And I feel that what the students are doing is thinking in a useful way about these things and then running it through Grammarly and turning in good papers. Grammarly is not writing the paper for them, but it's fixing the papers. And at first, I thought this is horrendous. They'll never learn anything.
They'll never learn.
This is what my teachers told me about spelling, that as soon as I get a spell check, I will never learn to spell. For me, this was always going to be true.
You were never going to learn to spell.
I was never going to learn to spell. This was not a question in my mind, and it shouldn't have been in theirs.
But your students at their age could learn to write English better, and it would actually improve their life if they're going to be here.
Well, what happened to everyone else with spell check is spell check taught them how to spell. Because it kept underlining things that were the same word every single time. And it would remind them that this is how you need to spell it. And, so when I was in 5th grade, I was held back from every recess because I couldn't spell the word because. And I had to write because double the amount of times as the last recess every time I misspelled it, which was, several times a day.
Was this in the UK or here?
This was in the United States.
Oh my God.
And so I was writing because hundreds and hundreds of times every recess.
That's causing me pain hearing that story.
Yes, exactly. No, so that scene in Harry Potter where he has to write something and the words appear in blood on his skin, that's taken directly from that approach to teaching. It was like carving these words into my own skin. It was so painful.
Can you spell the word because now?
Not really. If I work at it, I can mostly do it, but I'll be typing along and I'll see the little red underline. I'll go back and change it. Because is a word that often comes out wrong.
So are you maintaining that maybe people are learning how to write more slowly and differently, but they're still learning how to write? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm trying to say that like a lot of people learn how to spell from spell check, I'm seeing in the papers they write for me in class that are handwritten, their language is better than it had been. And it might be that they'd all just suddenly been taught better, and suddenly I've got a better crop of students. I do not believe this. Every other professor at the university is talking about how terrible the students are, and they're getting worse every year. Sorry, students out there. I shouldn't have said that. How do I say that better? There are worries that the universe concerns. Yeah, there are concerns that the students are not as good as they have been in previous years. I actually personally do not think that the problem lies completely with the students. I think it lies with the professors as much as it does with the students. As we get older, we get pickier in our lives, and many of the older professors remember how they were taught. They remember hand-drawing range maps. They remember cross-hatching pictures.
Basically, you're talking about hazing.
It's not quite hazing, but there's
which is deep in the university culture.
There's a feeling in the university culture that we have standards and we want our students to meet them. Whether those standards are important for the rest of the world or not doesn't always matter to the university, and that's where it comes to hazing.
I like this because but your sampling is way too small.
Absolutely.
I have been having ongoing conversations about how AI is going to make it so that nobody needs to learn how to write anymore. But if what you're telling me is that the right professor can still make students think and teach them how to think and use the tools they have to produce better papers, and then the repetition of that pedagogical approach actually improves their writing on its own.
Yes.
That is a very hopeful thing. But again, your sampling is way too small for me to really hang on to that at this point.
Well, if a student uses AI instead of writing, they won't get better. But if they use AI to fix their writing, they will.
Write better. They use AI and the tools they have in order to produce better writing.
So the reason my students are coming out as 60% human is Grammarly is artificially changing their language, but it's not complete. So it's not 100% AI.
Because they did actually write it.
Right. And so I see their comments, I see their ideas, but I see it written really well.
I am blown away by the fact that these AI detectors can actually assess it to that level of subtlety and fineness. It's amazing. The way you've described it, it is 60 to 65% their work. They did write it, but then everything else went and made it readable.
Right. And so if I get numbers that are, if they're not majority human, I tell them to try again, and that they have to rewrite with their own words what's there. I don't do this for every paper. I do spot checks. If a student is if I see a sudden change in a student's writing, I'll do it. Or if I see writing that just appears too good to be true, I will do it. But normally I can tell what a student should write like.
So you don't by rote run every student through an AI detector the way you run them through SafeAssign.
Right. SafeAssign is just a click, whereas the programs that I use for the students to submit their work do not have an AI detector built into them yet.
I think that's only a matter of time.
It's only a matter of time. Yeah, it will be built in very shortly. And it's really interesting how some of these detectors work. They're not just, was this copied from a previous paper, or does it lack bursting and turns of phrase that are human? They're also looking for the kinds of things that a forensic examination would look at. They're looking at, do the fonts change partway through? Was this cut and pasted? Is there line spacing differences? Are the
Wow.
are the editorial choices consistent throughout the paper? If someone has a particular kind of, so in details, there's something called an M dash versus an N dash.
Yes.
The length of a dash in a
Yes.
paper has to be one
It has
thing.
to be consistent. Yeah.
Published papers are all consistent because the editors will make you do that.
They'll make you use the M dash.
And so if a student is cutting and pasting from a published paper, there'll be a sudden change in editorial choices.
Yeah. The N dash will turn into M dashes.
Or vice
wait,
versa,
did
exactly.
you make that choice or did that just happen?
And so these programs pick up on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fascinating.
And it gives me a report on it as well. And so I then report this to the students, and at the very least, it makes their papers better because now they're not changing fonts halfway through the paper because they care now, and they're starting to do things like highlighting their whole paper, making sure it's in the same point and the same font, which they should have done anyway.
Yes,
and they should have done even if they weren't cutting and pasting. But it's the kind of thing that I can now make them pay attention to. So I'm making them better writers on these sort of technical levels, even if that technical level is essentially filing the serial numbers off of their fake work. And I'm thinking about this. Am I just preparing students to not be able to write and get out there and produce bad papers that they then fix? And I realized if they can do that for most of the time, that's going to be fine. If they don't write very well, but they know how to put it through Grammarly and turn out a good paper, that's sort of the bottom line.
These tools aren't going away. It's again, I have to keep coming back to the Sarah Lawrence education, and the question is, can they think? Like, if they can think their way through a problem to a solution, then they can force the tools that they have to get them to show how they did that well enough.
Yeah.
AI, they are scientists.
AI can think for you, but you have to be able to set it up properly. And Grammarly is doing very little thinking for you. It's really just rephrasing things into a better format. And so it's still really their own thoughts. And that's why I've decided to accept it.
And it's not a text spinner. It doesn't take immune system and turn it into protective framework.
Exactly. No, it gives me good words. And it knows when to use the right ones, because that's what AI does, right? It predicts the next word in a series of words.
You're presenting a more hopeful integration, a more hopeful view of the integration of AI into education and the future of our work than I've really seen up till now.
Well, because I was really afraid, and I got in front of it. I went to the AI classes that the university was giving me. I studied it on my own. I figured out what I could do. I wrote some papers on my own using AI. And they're good papers. They do a great job. Obviously, these are not things I've submitted for anything because they're full of fake data. They're full of fake data and they're fake citations.
Right. That's when you told me that it had made up a perfect experiment, an outcome that never happened.
Yeah, so like I was writing papers where I never did the experiment, and it did the experiment for me, did the results for me, gave me statistics. It was all there, and does a great job doing that. So AI can be a really useful guide for how to put something together. You could actually get it to tell you how to conduct the experiment you want to do, and it would write the methods for you. And then you could do those methods, and you would get useful results.
Then you write it yourself.
And then you could write it yourself. You would cut and paste the methods, and if anything you changed, you would fix to show what you actually did.
Yeah.
And this is the world we're going into. There are definitely still fears. So I know a young engineer who just graduated from engineering school, and he wrote his structural engineering thesis entirely with the AI. And this makes me worried, thinking about structural engineers who didn't actually do the research for structural engineering are out there building our bridges.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some places, the structural engineers who did do the work still build buildings that fall down.
Think about that. The guy who just had the workmen hammering away at the pillar that held up the building. They just found that out. And he signed off it. He said, that's not a structural pillar holding up that building, that anyone could have looked at the pillar seeing, that's holding up the building.
That is a structure, yeah.
Playing Jenga with a building.
Right, or the department store in 1996 when I went to Korea, like at the end of 90s, the department store had just fallen down.
So I suspect that there is human error and there's AI error, and both of these things we cannot get rid of, but I think we'll actually end up in a better world if we can use them in conjunction. If AI can be used to evaluate something and say, you probably shouldn't knock down that pillar, but you also need people checking the AI, because AI will hallucinate and come up with wrong things.
There's no building there. There's just a pillar. Don't worry about it.
And really consistently, so there was a new AI that came out recently that was supposed to have stopped hallucination, and I asked it a question that I'd asked previous AIs, and it gave me the same hallucinatory answer as all the other ones.
May I ask what question you're using, or is this a proprietary question?
No, it's a really interesting one. I wonder if I say it enough if the AI will learn, because it'll read this. Yeah, but I asked it if there is any art carved onto hand axes. So hand axes, Paleolithic hand axes, by definition, end before art begins.
Right, before art had been separated out.
With a 200,000 or 300,000 year gap between the two. And so by definition, there cannot be any art on hand axes. However, hand axes might have pretty stripes on them that the person knowingly included when they made the hand axe, but that was not something they carved in it. It is difficult for AI to read Wikipedia discussing these things and understand that hand axes don't have art on it. They see hand axes being made. They define art as something that gets made. Hand axes have an aesthetic value. They define art as having aesthetic value. And so the AI says, yes, absolutely, hand axes are an example of purposeful art showing an artistic result. And it gives me examples of it. And we'll say there was carvings on these things, there was decorations on them, and say at this particular site, these engraved hand axes were found. I know the site that they're talking about. They got it right from Wikipedia. I've read the article. There was no engraved hand axes found at that site. But there were things that made the AI think this. And so this is the kind of stuff where it's very difficult to know unless you're an expert in the field. For example, I was helping someone make a list of archaeological sites. And I said, well, let's just have AI start with the list. And then what we'll do is we'll go in and check every archaeological site against Google that AI has listed and see if it really exists. And it did a great job and we came up with all these fairly well-known sites. But some of the archaeologists who were then checking this could not recognize any of the things that had been found. So even though they're in Google and findable, they're not things that were really in the field of archaeology. So they were still being hallucinated because someone somewhere out there on the web had put something in the popular literature, but it didn't actually exist under that name or context in real archaeological literature. And so AI can't tell the difference between that, even when checked by someone who's checking to see if each of these things exist at that site with that name and those dates. AI is going to give you wrong answers and lead you astray.
This just goes to show there's no such thing as understanding where the AI is concerned.
AI has no understanding. There's no free lunch. You have to be able to do some of this stuff yourself. And it does worry me as we, there are some downsides.
I mean, you can use this to help you, but you still need to be an expert. You still need to know things. You still need to have knowledge and be able to evaluate yourself. Is this actually better? Is this actually right?
And a lot of people are going to be using AI as their search. And so AI is going to be summarizing search results. And AI is going to be what's teaching people in the future, in that you search something and find.
But not if your model is followed. You still need a teacher. You still need a person there.
But AI is not going to tell you that. So if you're a student and you think you can get an answer from AI, you're going to Google it, and AI is going to give you the answer, and you're going to cut and paste it. And most of the time, you're going to be right. And okay, so here's the other dark side that is coming really rapidly. Then professors are going to take these things and run them through AI to grade the papers. This is absolutely coming soon. When I first started playing with ChatGPT, if you took something and just cut and pasted into ChatGPT, it would give you a revised summary of it. And you could tell you how you want it, how long and what format, this sort of thing. Now, if you just take a paper and cut it into ChatGPT, it evaluates the paper. It gives you comments and tells you how the paper is doing and what it's doing. It basically looks at it the way a teacher would. And so I think that the engineers are subtly trying to bribe, particularly high school teachers, and saying, you were worried that all the students weren't going to be doing any work. You don't need to do any work. You can now take your students' papers, cut and paste them into ChatGPT. All the comments will be written for you. You just put a grade at the top. You adjust the comments as you see fit, because it's your work. and it's going to save you so much time. And so this is how AI is really being used. It's being used to save time, and it's being used by people who are intrinsically lazy, which is all of us. And it's going to mostly be useful and helpful and wonderful. And occasionally it's going to mislead us.
Except for the people that it provides catastrophes for, because it's misled them and they didn't catch it.
And they didn't catch it. And this is going to happen over and over again. It's going to happen to professors. It's going to happen to students. Lawyers, exactly. And it's going to be happening more and more often. And our AI hopefully will get better and better to try and minimize this. But we're going to have AI look at AI, and there'll have to be specialized AIs. If you want something for science, you're going to have one that's dedicated to that. If you want literature, one that's dedicated to that, instead of these sort of generalists ones. This is where I've been thinking about sort of how AI works a lot in relation to the human brain, is that our brain is made up of something like sections of specialist AI material. So that it's these very difficult to understand feedback loops that even when you know all the components, you can't really understand what's happening because everything has its own inhibitors on something that's also excitatory, and it's all these feedback loops in the brain. Each section of the brain talking to other sections of the brain, but also independently running its own sets of calculations.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Freud was trying to talk about an unconscious, he had no concept of how a brain actually worked. But now we're starting to see that there are these parts that are not, we don't consciously understand them, but they're doing all of the calculations that lead us to how we live our life. So there's something that tells us in our brain is, who is this person? They do facial recognition and says, is this person someone you recognize? That's going to be connected to reward centers. Then I get dopamine if I see someone I like. I don't get dopamine if I don't see someone I like. All of these things are prior to our conscious understanding of, ooh, I like this person. And so there's all of these things sort of happening under the hood that then come up to a level of consciousness. Certainly, much of philosophy, Buddhism, etc., has thought for a long time that consciousness itself is an illusory sort of emergent capability built onto all of these underlying pieces. And this is something that I think AI is kind of working at. That it's trying to create the illusion of all of these pieces at once, which is part of why it doesn't work really well. But it's going to need specialized pieces that work together to work on specific components. And then there's going to need to be an overall AI that is going to have to say, here I'm putting it together into this sort of personality.
So you're talking about building a brain from
I'm building
multiple AIs.
Multiple AI components, none of which themselves have a soul.
This is an old science fiction concept.
Absolutely. None of which themselves have a soul, but as an aggregate might have something more than the pieces on their own. So I don't know what
you've gone a step too far for me, but
well, exactly. But I don't know what a human soul is. I feel like I have one.
All I know is that I feel things and that the machines don't. So that's just a bridge that can't be, the divide that can't be crossed.
It's just one Turing test away. It's if something
till they make us believe that they're feeling, because they're still machines. They don't feel.
We're a machine. We are incredibly complicated machines, but we are machines. We are absolutely mechanistic.
Dopamine and all the hormones,
of these things.
None of that stuff exists in an electronic
No,
model.
and so this is something where I don't know if they'll ever really be able to compete with us in that sense.
Exactly.
But I think that's a computational issue. By Moore's law, computers will have as many transistors as a human brain has neurons in the next 10 years or so, by Moore's law. So number of neurons in a human brain, number of transistors on a chip.
Do neurons and transistors work the same way? Are they?
Well, here's the thing.
Are they actually comparable in that way?
In many ways. So a transistor has an input and an output, and then it has a third wire that comes in that tells it whether or not that input and output should be passed on.
Yeah.
So there's a feedback aspect to it, and then there's a throughput aspect to it. That is how nerves work. They have inputs, they have outputs, and they have a nerves that come in from
and
the
is
side.
it only on or off, or is there a
Well, that's the
modulation?
thing. That's the thing.
Is there a gradient?
Because they're biological systems,
Yeah.
everything's working with diffusion gradients.
Yes.
The numbers of inputs are in the hundreds. The numbers of outputs are in the hundreds, and the things that tell it to be on or off are in the 50, 60,000s. So even while we'll have the same number of neurons as transistors, or transistors as we have neurons very, very soon, we are, I think, many orders of magnitude away from being able to do, for computers being able to do what people really do.
Right.
So
and then that is all affected by all of this gooey, mushy mess that creates feelings. Like this never will exist in no matter how many AIs you cobble together to create a brain from the Culture series. You're never going to get something that feels anything.
Well,
it can record inputs. It can.
Here's the problem.
Sense damage. It's not going to hurt.
We can make it say it does, and we will never know what it really does because all the actual computations are not really accessible. AIs are not written by people. They write themselves, and we won't really know. Somewhat like the brain is. So,
what could possibly go wrong?
I know. So if you look at any neuron in the brain, it clearly it's alive, but it's not thinking. It's just sending out chemicals.
Yes.
The whole brain is doing this.
I see what you're saying.
At a certain level, it's just an emergent property.
It becomes a gestalt.
Something like that. Yeah.
I guess, and this is where, although I am not a religious person, I guess this is where a sense of belief comes in. I believe that I am fundamentally different than any machine that is not biological.
So there's a wasp out there with about 12, 14 neurons. It can dig a burrow, lay eggs, or actually dig a burrow first. Then it goes and gets a spider, knows which species of spider to find.
One species.
It has a particular array of them, but
out of the bazillions.
Yes, it knows which ones it wants, right size, right place, goes and finds its burrow again, and lays an egg in the spider, and the spider gets horribly eaten by its progeny. This is complex. This is something that will be very difficult to get a computer to do, to be able to find something in the wild, pick it up, fly it back, inject it in the exact right way with a poison so that the spider doesn't die, and stays nicely fresh for the horrible things that are going to eat it alive. All of this is tremendously complex. It is mostly hardwired into the wasp, but the wasp has to have a lot of flexibility. It doesn't know where that spider is going to be. It has to be able to bring that spider back to its home, where it makes a new home every year, or different wasps make different homes. All of these things have to be able to be flexible, and there's less than 20 neurons in its brain. So clearly, number of neurons is not the defining characteristic. It's the connections between them. It's diffusion constants relating between. A feeling, in some ways, is a buildup of particular things like dopamine in particular areas of your brain. At the same time as, say, serotonin is building up in another part of your brain, and your feeling is then averaging between these diffusion constants that are showing what the concentration is and how far it's spreading in certain areas. These are feelings, and they're really, really complex.
Right, and you're talking about the gradient mixture over an actual physical distance of mush. It's just, no matter how complex you get an AI brain to be, you're never going to have that.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, this is what Turing was asked when they said,
he was just saying it wouldn't make a difference because we wouldn't know.
No. He actually said, I think I'm intelligent and I'm a machine. So that was his straight out reasoning. Machines will eventually be intelligent because people are intelligent and people are machines. Argument.
But are we machines? Are animals are machines? Like, it's all a machine?
Yeah. I mean, how
a biological thing that is born as opposed to a silicon thing that is made? I don't
see how they are different. They're just a collection of molecules interacting in particular ways. You can build any one of them.
Okay, Dr. Manhattan.
It's just a code.
You're right. I mean,
it's just code.
Okay.
It's really incredibly beyond our understanding complex code.
I can't argue with that.
You know, one of my favorite comics, XKCD, was saying, you know, people from the computer world come into biology and say, it's just code. I'm going to solve all your problems right now. And he says, you know, look at the optimization for Google. Google's only been around for a couple of decades now. The you know, code source for Google is a nightmare of code at this point, because it's been building and building and building on itself for decades. We have code that's been building and building on itself for a billion years. So the optimization processes are really subtle, and they're
and for those years we've been doing a lot of that optimization very slowly.
But involving things like making a new kind of neuron to do a particular new kind of thing, and then putting those together.
Right.
So, you know, you were just talking about, or I was talking about the ghost in the machine aspect of our brain, where we have this consciousness. We think our consciousness sits in our forebrain, the prefrontal lobe. That's what we take out when you do a frontal lobotomy. We think that's where sort of impulse control and all this sort of higher reasoning comes in. Ours is only 6% larger than a chimpanzee's. Our brain as a whole is about 4 times larger, so 400% larger. But our frontal lobe is only about 6% larger. We think our frontal lobe does better work than chimps does, more, you know, better by more than just 6%. And it's all about the folding in there. So the shapes of things matter in biology an awful lot. We're only beginning to explore this kind of thing in AI and the architecture and how these architectures are going to work with each other. You know, I think most AIs are working calculations at the level of, say, what some of the dopamine circuits might be doing in your nucleus accumbens, right? So these are things that tell you whether something is good or bad.
That deep, low understandings of basic things.
Way below most of the, you know, higher portions of the brain. Higher portions of the brain that explain what we feel. And so, you know, I think AI might end up working along those lines. Again, I don't think it's going to be us anytime soon, but as soon as it can fool us, that's what Turing said, that it will be us and indistinguishable from us, and it doesn't really matter if it is actually as complex.
Well, it's not fooling us yet, and as hard as your students work, it still can't necessarily fool you all the time.
No, and that's the nice thing is that soul that you're talking about, that the bursting is.
Well, I didn't use that word, but okay, yes.
Yeah. The thing that makes us different from the machines, it's not just the mistakes, it's our idiosyncrasies. It's the turns of phrases you use personally. There's an entropy to your language.
Yes.
And some people have a higher entropy than others. They have a wider vocabulary. They use more variety. Other people have very specific turns of phrases. So, you know, when Ted Kaczynski was producing his stuff, they were able to identify him partly by looking at the entropy of his language, because he'd written a lot. They could compare what kinds of words he used to other things. The AI is doing similar kinds of work, and the AI detectors are looking for that. And so they're looking for you know, what makes this person human. It's those turns of phrases. It's unusual things that they say. It's relating something to a scientific paper that an AI wouldn't mention. So, you know, if I'm having my students write a paper on say blood sugar content, students will often talk about family members who have diabetes. AI is never going to do that. It's never going to just throw that into a paper. My students need me to know these things because they're humans talking to a human. And this is where personal feeling comes in, and this is the kind of stuff that an AI detector can find and say, you know, yeah, that's not an AI, that's a person. They just talked about their mom, you know. Yeah. These are things that AIs would have difficulty for. You know, it's a funny thing in Blade Runner, the Voight-Kampff test. You know, you're in a desert and you see a tortoise lying on its back in the sun.
Yeah.
You know, what's a tortoise? You know what a turtle is? Same thing. You know, that whole thing. That was trying to elicit an emotional response in this AI. One of the interesting things of Philip K. Dick was he thought that eventually you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. He wondered if we could tell the difference in ourselves. Are we ourselves AI? This is what some of the whole simulation questions are. Would you even know if you yourself are an AI?
I mean, we're going back to the reboot of Battlestar Galactica that ends with the merging of.
And so with Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? There was a hypothesis that if you let the androids live long enough, they'd be able to pass the Voight-Kampff test. And what they'd done is they'd started implanting false memories so that these androids thought that they were human, and these false memories gave them that background. And you could still just about tell who they were with the Voight-Kampff test, but it took much, much longer. They were able to pass it for longer because they were having these emotional responses that they said that they felt, but they were not real in the sense of a human because they were artificial.
They've never actually had
those experiences. Yeah, so I don't know where the limit is. I think we're actually really far away from that limit. These are still tools. I don't think we need to be afraid of them. I think in the context of teaching, I think we do need to be afraid of them when it comes to, say, facial recognition by an authoritarian government. That's going to be really bad. You combine facial recognition with, say, AI of who's likely to act out against the government based on who their associations are.
I mean, we can go a lot further because AI can just track everyone's cell phone and then start predicting where you're going to be.
Exactly, and predict who your associations are likely to be, and then arrest you on behalf of these predictions. And there are a lot of places where a government would be. I would think they're absolutely willing to arrest a few innocent people if it just stops any possibility of rebellion. That wouldn't bother them at all. And so this is the kind of stuff where I'm afraid of AI, that kind of prediction. I'm also afraid of AI when it comes to predicting my marketing choices, where it will predict what I want. And there's a certain sort of subtle moment where it's telling me what I want. And if it's always right, it knows what I want. I mean, and then it suggests something to me that I might want.
Right.
Now it's starting to make me want those things.
And this is what frightens me about the coming use of teachers using and professors using these tools to grade papers. Because we're now giving up. You're saying that there's a way to get a hold of this, but then if teachers start using it to grade the papers that the students have used to write it, we're giving it away.
And as our papers move more and more towards an AI optimum standard English, the AI will pick up on this and refine the AI standard English even more.
We're all going to be writing and talking like newscasters on the nightly news.
Exactly. Yes. That's where we are definitely headed, because that's where AI will take us. Because it's not making these decisions. We are. We're saying a paper that doesn't have a lot of weird stuff in it is better than a paper that does.
I have to believe that humanity will persist, that we will keep our human nature one way or another.
No, I'm sure a high school professor will have a paper that gets graded, and then at the bottom say, "Hey, I saw you at the school Christmas party. It was great. It was great hearing you sing," or something like that, right at the bottom to show that they're human. But the rest of it will all be AI. I think that's the kind of world we're heading toward, where workers are using AI to do rough drafts of basically all of their work. Then they're quickly rewriting it, submitting it to a manager who puts it through an AI to see if it's there. The workers will be hired by AI, already are. The AI checks their resume and goes through tens of thousands to pick the right person. If I'm writing a resume, I'm going to say, "Hey, AI, what words should I put in this resume to get it noticed by an AI?" And it will tell me.
Yep.
And optimization. So I should probably take my podcasts and put them through search optimization AI so that I know exactly what to do there. There are people who are paid to come up with search optimization terms. That doesn't need to be done. It could be done by AI, absolutely. I would bet if there are people being paid to come up with search optimization terms, they're already using AI to come up with those terms for you.
Well, I mean, we use AI to create the transcript of this.
It does a terrible job, by the way. I've been reading the transcripts.
I do a little spot checking, to be honest, but I don't go through it entirely. But part of the problem is that it doesn't know when one of us stops and the other one starts. But
combined with my sort of repetitive stuttering and misstepping on words all the time, it has a lot of problems. And then my vocabulary, it did not know who Duns Scotus was the other day when I mentioned it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I try to go through and catch the important terms so that they are on the web correctly. But yes, I will miss some too.
But yeah, anyway, so This for me was really hopeful as a professor to see my students actually getting better at writing through the way they're using AI, not the way I expected it. I thought that they'd be making their outlines with AI, but students don't make outlines. They just start writing the paper, and then something goes wrong, so they fix it using Grammarly. And so it's not the process I thought.
I hope y'all are using outlines. It makes everything easier and helps you write the paper and rewrite the paper.
Absolutely.
But so important.
At the level I'm working with, where their students are reading one scientific journal article, and then they're writing a 2-page single-spaced paper on that scientific journal article, an outline doesn't help you much, because the paper is already broken up into sections. Those sections already have a particular format.
I guess, again, I'm a product of a Sarah Lawrence education.
You're thinking of a 20-page paper where you've read 4 books, and you need to think about how those books relate to each other.
Yes, I am.
That's the humanities. It's a very different kind of world. Now, if someone's writing a thesis, I suggest you start off by your dissertation thesis. Ask the AI what to do. Ask the AI about each chapter. It will make your life much easier.
Ask the AI to help you write the outline.
Yeah. No, this is what I've been doing, and I absolutely use it that way. And I hope to use it even more. There's an awful lot of writing that is not really necessary, that is there to keep bureaucracies alive. Bureaucracies eat paper, and so the AI will now be producing this paper, and very soon the AI will be doing the bureaucracy side of things too. So AI will be feeding itself paper, and we can just sit back and watch it all happen.
And watch it hallucinate and mess with our lives.
Yes, well, it'll be a while, but eventually a tenure review will be AI conducted. You'll just submit your stuff, and it'll come up with an answer.
This has been a pretty far-ranging conversation, but I have to say it's really the first seriously hopeful view I've had of how AI can be integrated into a university setting, and that positive outcomes can come. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I think they actually are. As I said, I think my students are actually writing better now than they have previous years.
That's an amazing thing to hear. All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Until next time.
Thank you.
Keep writing, everyone.